Today's webinar is being presented by our colleague, Dr. Melissa Olive. We have collaborated with Dr. Olive for several years, and her wealth of knowledge on ABA and practical ways to improve the lives of people with autism are a fantastic resource, and we're thrilled to be able to share some of this with you. Dr. Olive is a co-founder of Applied Behavioral Strategies. She has served in a leadership role on several councils and journals, and she has published 30 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters focusing on topics related to behavioral analysis, including the assessment and treatment of challenging behaviors, communication intervention, and feeding disorders. Dr. Olive has become a leading expert on using technology to aid with instruction in the area of communication in academics. Dr. Olive's interest in this community is more than professional. Since 1993, she has cared for and advocated on behalf of her brother, Mac, an adult with autism and intellectual disability. Now, before we begin the presentation, please note that questions can be typed into your control panel throughout the presentation, and time permitting, they will be addressed at the end. Again, I just wanted to apologize for those that are just now joining us for any issues that you might have had registering or logging in this morning. We've had some service issues with GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar, and unfortunately there wasn't anything we could control from our end. Again, if for some reason the webinar is interrupted permanently, we will reschedule for a later time. Now please welcome Dr. Olive.
All right, let's try this again. Sorry about that. I'm going to go up one slide. There. So Nisi told you about the Johnson Center and ARI social media. Here is some information about our agency, Applied Behavioral Strategies. The handouts will be available in their entirety on our website, appliedbehavioralstrategies.com. They'll be right on the home page. If you go there now, chances are you're going to find the handouts from the last webinar in April, but hopefully they will have them uploaded either by the end of today, if not by the end of the week. And when you download the handouts, you'll see the links for both the Johnson Center and ARI. And as Nisi said, the ARI has their own webinar initiative. You can also get a number of their webinars from their YouTube channel. So today we're just going to briefly talk about augmentative and alternative communication, what it is, the pros and cons of different things. I'm going to touch on the law mostly because it applies to everyone in the United States. I recognize that there may be people on from around the world, but I think it's important for you to know your child's rights. I'm going to present just a little bit of information on the different types of devices and strategies, as well as the assessment that should take place in order to properly serve your child. And then last, I'll go through the different forms. I have my iPad here too and can show you some tricks that I've done on Proloquo, which is my favorite, but it is not always appropriate for every user. Okay, so augmentative and alternative communication is anything that we use to enhance or improve or compensate for the language or communication of another person. So that can be sign language, it can be devices, it can be pointing, it can be anything that makes it easier or better for a person. Now, People that typically use AAC include individuals with an intellectual disability, individuals with cerebral palsy, obviously those that we love, the ones on the spectrum, but it can also include individuals with apraxia or dyspraxia, and older people who maybe had speech at one point but lost it due to an acquired disability. Now, before we get too in-depth, I just want to make sure we understand the difference between language and communication. Communication is...
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Webinars Made Easy.
You're like shaking the T to indicate that you have to go to the toilet, whereas language is a very complex system of rules. Rules about where to stand, rules about how to look, rules about how to respond. And so it is much more complex, obviously, than communicating. And so we can teach anybody to communicate, but teaching the whole process of the language might be a little more complex. When I was in grad school and taking my class on AAC, and I'd like to pretend that was just 2 or 3 years ago. Sadly, it was many years ago. But we actually taught a dog to use an augmentative device to ask for a treat. Now, was the dog using language? No, the dog was communicating. Did the dog understand some language? Probably, but we don't know how much. When we talk about how people can communicate, there are a number of different ways that we can make that happen. So we can use vocal communication. My brother, who is 34 and has an intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, seizure disorder, and a few other things, he uses vocal communication a lot. He can say, hi, which sort of sounds like hi to me and sometimes sounds like hi to a new person. He can also say, ka 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 ka, which has multiple meanings. We'll talk about soon. He also uses ka 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 to ask for a Coke, to ask to watch his favorite movie Convoy, and then he'll say ga ga to ask for his cracker. The problem with vocal communication is that he knows what he's saying, but I have to be able to differentiate all of those different ka-ka-ka-kas that he has. He also has 2 different uh-ohs. He has uh-oh, which means I see something I like, or I see something that I recognize. And then he has uh-oh, which means I've done something that you don't want to know about. And so, again, a regular old user, a receiver, might not understand what he's saying, but because of our history, I do. So that's, the obvious limitations of the vocal communication. One of the strengths is that it's always with the user. So he can always rely on those vocal utterances when he really needs to make a point. He does have to rely on his memory to remember what sounds he knows how to make. He knows how to say Ma, which is Mark, for our brother Mark, but he also happens to have a roommate named Mike, and so he says Ma, and I have to know that he's talking about our brother Mark or Mike, and I have to just ask him, or do you mean Mark, our brother, or do you mean Mike, your roommate? Moving on, then you have verbal communication, and that's where we all, or most of us, I'm assuming that you're all speakers, any of us who speak, we have verbal communication. We have the full word, we can say the word, and obviously it's extremely portable. We have to remember, so if we begin to develop Alzheimer's or other memory overload, we might have difficulty remembering all those vocabulary words. If you speak the same native language, English versus Spanish versus Chinese, Mandarin, if you speak the same language, then it is a very effective way to communicate. Okay, but you have to be in that same language world for everybody to understand it. Gesture systems can include formal and informal systems. So we're all familiar with informal systems. We can point and everybody understands what we're talking about. You can flip the finger, if you all know what I mean, and pretty much everybody in our country knows what that means. We can do a pledge to the flag. We can, even a simple smile is a gesture that conveys a meaning that most of us understand. We also have our formal systems, and we are all mostly familiar with Signing Exact English or American Sign Language. ASL is the one that's used by people in the deaf culture, and Signing Exact English, it depends on which philosophy you embrace, but in Signing Exact English, you sign every single word you are speaking, and that helps the person who's learning the language also then know English so that they can read and not have to learn a whole new language when it's time to learn how to read. The downside of the gesture systems is that the person who's receiving the gesture must know what it means. They must understand each of the words and understand how those words are put together. If you're a good signer, then you can talk and talk and talk and talk for hours on end. And obviously, as long as your hands aren't injured, your gesture system is quite portable. You do still have to use your memory. Then we have symbol communication. Symbol communication can be formal, and it can also be informal. The informal systems could be hand drawing a picture or holding up a picture and merely pointing to it, or flipping through a magazine and pointing to it. Whereas the formal system, PECS is somewhat considered a formal system, but there are other even more formal systems such as the bliss symbols. And if you've got your computer up, you could quickly do a Google of bliss symbols and you will see the entire library of symbols that they have. The difficulty with symbol communication is that we do have to be able to carry it from place to place. So you can either have a photo book or you can have your PECS book. The problem is that depending on how big your vocabulary is, it may make your system larger, and so that may make it difficult for you to carry around. It's also much slower to open up a book and show a picture and try to have a conversation with someone. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details of everything because I'd much rather you have the handouts so you have the information when you need it, and then I'll just verbally cover the other content. So for focus and speech-generated devices, these can be computers, these can be simple switches. It also includes your iPad. It is a device that will help convey the meaning. In a low-tech device, it's a simple on and off switch that you can record a simple phrase into it and then hit the switch and it will replay the phrase for you. Long ago, before the invention of the iPad, much of my research included the very simple switches like the Big Macs, the Jelly Beans, which are just smaller versions of the Big Macs. I also did a lot of work with the Touch Talker. And then you have your high-tech devices, which can be extremely expensive. My brother had a Mini-Merc, which cost about $8,000. The Dynabox, I'm not even sure of the going rate for it these days. They're very advanced. They can run on Windows software or Windows platforms, but they are very complicated in terms of programming, so someone has to know how to input all of that. The iPad, with its invention several years ago, has resulted in many options for communication output. And it tends to fall under the low-tech option because it's simple and very easy to program. But it has the high-tech capabilities in terms of the complexity of the communication. Now, I think it's really important to understand that, and there's been research studies on this as well. Jeff Zigerfus has done some of this as well as some other people. They're comparing user preference. What do users like? Who likes the iPad? Who likes signing? Who likes PECS? And this should not surprise you, because if you love a child with autism, then you know that they are very unique and they don't necessarily like or enjoy the same thing that someone else with autism likes or enjoys. And so every single research study has proven over and over and over again that it's based on the user. So some users are going to prefer the iPad, other users are going to prefer PECs, other users are going to want to sign, and other users are going to want to try to talk with their mouths, even though it's very difficult to understand them. There is no one-size-fits-all. Okay, and I'm just going to repeat that one more time to make sure we're clear. There is no one-size-fits-all. It is completely individualized, and therefore we can't in a blanket statement say everybody needs to have this, because it's not necessarily going to work for them. We want to make sure that we get effective communication, spontaneous, independent communication that is used everywhere in that person's life. I often teach total communication, meaning that I will teach PECs and iPads and sign language simultaneously to make sure that the learner has a way to communicate, because that's the most important thing for me. The pros of having one of these devices is obviously that they're portable, they're easy to program. Most of the time they're understandable by others. We used to have issues with the life of the device, meaning that sometimes the devices would only last 3 or 4 or 5 years. But now with iPads, I mean, the iPad that I have is already 3 years old. And so how much longer is it going to last? And the cost is so much cheaper. My brother no longer uses his mini Merc, and he has moved on to an iPad. And like I said, the mini Merc was $8,000. His iPad with his speakers, with Proloquo, is less than $1,100. So it is vastly cheaper in comparison. Now, there are also cons of these devices. They have to be programmed. They do not operate on their own. Some things may not be completely portable. The iPad in and of itself, really needs a case with a handle, or it might need to be mounted onto the wheelchair, depending on the user. And not all users know how to use the device, so we actually have to teach them how to use it. We have to worry about motor skills. My brother has fine motor problems, and so he can't always get that pointer finger to come out properly, and so then the rest of his knuckles might tap the screen, and that ruins his attempt to communicate. And then also, depending on where they are cognitively, they may or may not be able to generate their own ideas, and so we do have to provide some level of support. I'm not going to go through the pros and cons of everything else, and so I'm going to skip on into what your students, your loved ones' rights are under special ed law. Actually, I'm going to kind of stop here and look over and make sure that I'm not missing any questions. Okay, so I think for those of you who may have joined late, the slides will be up on my agency's website, and you can download them from there. Okay, so if you live in the United States, and if your loved one is under the age of 21, and they have a diagnosis of autism, they are 99.9% likely to also have an IEP, or an individualized education plan. If your child has an IEP, or if they are eligible for special education services, then they are also eligible to certain rights related to augmentative communication. I'm not going to go through the process for what IDEA is supposed to do. You can go back and refer to the slide for that. But one of the rights is that your loved one, or if you're the teacher, the child in your class, has the right to speak and be educated and be assessed in their native language. And the definition of native language is right on your screen. But basically what this means is if the student uses a device, then that device must be used when they're being assessed. Okay? If they speak sign language, that is also their native language, then sign language needs to be the mode of the assessment process. As part of the IEP team they have to consider lots of things, including their problem behavior, right? But they must also consider, let me get back, the functional skills and the communication skills. And they have to do so in order to write a good IEP. And that IEP is supposed to meet that child's needs. So typically what you get is an IEP with academic goals, language goals, adaptive goals, motor goals, social, emotional, and behavioral goals. As part of that process of writing the IEP, the team must consider your child's communication needs. If you're the teacher, you must consider the child's communication needs. And the next step is to consider whether the child needs AT, meaning assistive technology. Okay, it's a part of it. It's not to be skipped over. If your child is not an effective communicator, they must be considered for an AT assessment. So here's a case study. We had Daniel, and of course it's not his real name. He was 8 years old. He had autism. He was nonverbal. He had awful, awful, awful problem behavior. And his IEP team determined that he did not need an assistive technology eval because they were going to keep working on his verbal language. Now, you can imagine I started having seizures when I heard about this case, and I promptly called in and said, you will give him an assistive technology evaluation, or the family has a right to go to due process. And actually, you don't even have to go to due process. You can just file a state complaint. Because if that child is nonverbal, that in and of itself shows that some sort of evaluation is needed so that the team can best meet his educational communication needs. The law also defines what an assistive technology device is. And I'm not going to read that to you because it's right there. But it is not so specific that it has to be communication. Somebody has their mic on. Can you make sure that your mic is muted? And Nisi, can you make sure whoever's mic that is gets muted? Thank you. So it does not include a medical device or a surgically implanted device, such as a cochlear implant. Okay, but it does include any sign language. Any pictures, any device, any transition. If you have transition schedules that your student needs to use, this is all included in what's called assistive technology. The student is also entitled to assistive technology service, which means that they get evaluated, they get the device purchased, they get it selected, fitted, updated, etc. Now, what does that mean if it's an iPad? That means that if the student gets an evaluation and the evaluation determines that the iPad is the most appropriate device for communication, not for play, then the district would purchase the iPad for the student. But it is only supposed to be purchased for communication. It is not supposed to be purchased for games and other sorts of fun things. It also means that the district is responsible should the device break, or if you want to add additional software, you can't. That's the district's, and so that the district would be responsible for doing that. Also, as part of the assistive technology service, it needs to be coordinated between everybody else. It also needs to include training for the student and training for the student's family and training for any of the people that are working with the student, including employers if the student is of transition age. So again, every school district across this country is responsible for this. All right, so here's a case study. The child's name is Nider, 7-year-old male, has Down syndrome, the child is completely nonverbal, and during the IEP meeting, someone, the team determined that AT was not available because their district was so small and they had very limited resources. So again, another time when Missy starts having seizures, and I said, absolutely not. It's a right of that student. If the district doesn't have the resources internally, then they must financially pay for NIDR to go somewhere else to get tested. And that includes out of district, out of state, whatever is required. You cannot say, we're so poor we can't afford it. Money cannot be a reason why a child is not assessed. And then in terms of whether that device goes home, okay, the device going home is a team decision. And parents are part of the team. Sometimes the student is a part of the team. It's a team decision. Okay, so they cannot have a blanket policy that across the board says the device cannot go home. So here we have Susie. She was 12. She had cerebral palsy. She uses GoTalk. And the teacher said, GoTalk cannot go home with Susie. It is too expensive for us to replace it if Susie throws it at home and breaks it. Same thing for Jonna. She's 10 years old, has autism. She uses the iPad with software called TouchChat. And her principal said in the IP meeting, oh, our district policy is that the iPad stays at school. And then she went on to say, we'll buy the software so she can have it on her own home iPad. Well, here I am in the IEP meeting having seizures again. And I said, well, what happens if Jonna's on the bus and she has to go pee? So she just supposed to pee on herself? Because she needs her iPad to be able to say, hey, stop, I need to use the bathroom. Now, it's not just for communication. Assistive technology can include all sorts of other ways to support the learner. But today, we're just here to talk about the communication. So as I'm changing slides, Kelly just asked, how do you become certified in training for assistive technology? There is no national certification at this time. Some states have certification. You can go to certain universities and they will give you a certificate of an AT trainer. You can obviously take additional classes through universities and whatnot and build your own resume. It's not so much about being certified, it's about having the experiences under your belt so that you know how to recommend and what to recommend. And most states have at least one assistive technology center where you can go and look at the devices and potentially do even an internship. And Nelda, I'm going to get your question in a little bit, all right? So I'm going to move on now, making sure that you understand. I just reviewed federal law. You also have a state law that's specific to the state where you live. So you want to make sure that you become familiar with your state law on augmentative and alternative communication. Texas has this great side-by-side document, and you can actually see Texas law, which you may or may not be interested in, but it's linked to the federal law. So it's a beautiful PDF copy of the federal law and Texas law, so you can at least see the federal law in an easy way to understand it. And you can, because it's a PDF, you can search for certain terms in there like augmentative communication if you're interested. Okay, I'm going to change gears. Actually, I'm going to pause and I'm going to take Nelda's question. So Nelda says, my 5-year-old son loves the iPad. When it comes for me to show him how to use it, he starts to scratch me and kick. He doesn't want me to teach him. What can I do to calm him down and show him that I want to use the device for communication? So Nelda, that's a fantastic question. It's something that we see a lot. It's amazing to me that the numbers of infants and toddlers that I see with these devices that already know how to shoo my hand out of the way. It is a process. It's not going to get fixed overnight. And I honestly am not sure that you're in a position to do it all by yourself. It might require the help of your special ed teacher or a speech and language pathologist who can come and work with you in the home and teach him to understand that the iPad is for communication. Now, what we do on all of our cases, and you probably aren't going to like this, we set it so that the device is only for communication. Okay? So that means the student can't use the device for anything else, never. And if you want your student to have something to play on, then you would have to get a separate device to do that. And I recognize that that's expensive, but it is important that this is your child's voice. Do you ever want to turn off your child's voice? No. And so in order for your child to understand this is my voice, that's how the device needs to be used all of the time. All right, one more question, because Kim's question is definitely very appealing to me. What if the AT the child uses is not evidence-based, so the district won't recognize it? There is no such thing as evidence-based type of communication. Okay, like right here I've got the slides up on PECs, and then I'm going to pull up the slides on speech-generated devices. There's plenty of research on sign language. I can't imagine, maybe Kim, you could tell me what your child is using that they're trying to tell you is not evidence-based, but the link that is on your screen right now, which is the Autism Professional Development Center at the Frank Porter Graham Center at the University of North Carolina, is a wonderful resource because it lists a lot of different evidence-based instructional strategies specifically for children with autism. Okay, and you need to take that to your district and go, here, you can't argue with this because these are professionals in the field who are telling us what's research-based. And I'm not going to click on those links and take you there because you can do that on your own. Okay. There are similar research studies on the VOCA and SGD. Okay. They are, those research articles show that, again, this is another evidence-based approach for individuals on the spectrum. The research on iPads has not been synthesized yet, but I can tell you there are already studies out there on its effectiveness, so much so that there are already studies comparing whether learners like iPads versus PECs. Okay, so your school can't argue that these things are not evidence-based. Now, the other area where parents get a little nervous is they are worried that if they use AAC with their child, that their child will never learn to talk. And that is just flat out not the case, okay? We have enough research, and the Miller and the Schlosser studies both reviewed a bunch of studies to show or to look at, do children go on to learn to talk? And the important thing is, and I never, ever, ever want to say never, but generally 8 years old is the cutoff. If the children are talking before age 8, that's the good sign. After age 8, it's much more difficult to develop spoken language. I'm not going to say it won't happen. I'm just going to tell you that the likelihood starts to decrease. Okay? But we need to give these students a voice even before age 8, so that they understand that communication and language are important. And what I have discovered in my work with kids is some students that we thought had very low cognitive functioning, when we got them a way to talk, we suddenly realized that they knew a whole lot more than anybody ever thought. So please don't refrain from using augmentative communication, because it will not keep your child from talking. It will only help them develop those skills. And we could do a whole class just on how to make that happen, but just trust me when I say that that's not the case. And I just did something wrong. I don't know what I did. I wanted to be able to see my questions popping up, and I did something wrong. Just bear with me, sorry. You guys are being very patient. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take the next question while my slides are pulling up. I have an 11-year-old son with autism. I asked my school district to evaluate him for a device, and they denied us because he has some language and feel he could be dependent. No. What can I do? So, Stacy, you simply go back to IEP because you want to be nice, and you say, I'm going to ask you again In fact, I just went to this awesome training and learned it's my child's right. If they deny you again, your fastest route is to file a complaint with the state, and then the second fastest route is to, obviously you can sign disagree, but then you can go to due process. But file a state complaint and let them know that you're going to file a state complaint, and that will stop it right away. It's unconscionable. Okay, why can't the child move in between fun and language apps? My son will watch YouTube and then open Pro. Dom, I'm not saying that they can't. I'm just saying that for many students, they don't understand that the device is not a toy, and so they don't ever want to use it to talk because they want to have their face in a game. So please don't think that I'm saying you never can. Just that when they're in the early stages of learning, it's best for it not to serve two purposes. My brother goes back and forth as well. We had a school tell a parent that the pod system is a prerequisite to the iPad. He learned to use pictures very quickly, but the school says it will take him a year. Okay, again, that is baloney, because I just taught a 3-year-old with Down syndrome to use the iPad in less than a week. So that's baloney. And then, Alicia, if you will email me, I will help you find the research studies. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my slides. Okay, so my phrase here is everybody needs to have a voice. It's a teacher's job, it's a speech and language pathologist's job, and it's the behavior analyst's job to make sure that everyone has a voice to communicate. So this is a case study, a little guy named Alex. Well, he wasn't little, he was quite big. He was 28. He had autism. He had an intellectual disability. He was nonverbal. He hit his head so bad that he was blind in one eye. He had cataracts in the other eye, again, from hitting himself in the head. He graduated from high school. He had 18 years of special ed, and he had nothing. He had no vocal skills. He had no verbal skills. He had no gesture skills. He had no picture skills. Nothing. And so for me to walk in and they want me to fix his SIB, the first thing out of my mouth was, he's pissed off. He has every right to be pissed off because he has no way of saying, I need to eat, I need to drink, I need to pee, I need to poop, nothing. And so basically his dignity was taken from him for those 18 years of special education where no one taught him anything. And then we have my little guy, Mac, who's 34. He has about 200 different signs that he does, but he has fine motor deficits. So his word for water doesn't look like you and I would know how to sign water. His word for eat does not look like what we know eat to look like. And so it becomes very difficult for everybody to understand him. And in fact, I've been accused of teaching him my own sign language so that only I know how to talk to him, which is just ludicrous. The group home where he works, they don't know, I'm sorry, the group home where he lives, the staff do not know sign language because they're just regular old people off the street. Why would they know sign language? And so we insisted that he have some other way to communicate because it's impossible for, especially with the turnover in group homes, for them to understand all those signs that he has. The other thing I want to add is that when you start an augmentative program, it does not require you to stop your verbal language program. So if your child's getting ABA and say you're working on what's called verbal behavior, where you're teaching them to imitate or teaching them to demand or teaching them to tack.
It was on adults.
Oh, can you guys unmute, please?
Yeah, that's a lot more.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Somebody's got their microphone on. I will.
It doesn't as much like how to.
Hang on a second. I'm just going to send a quick text message.
Why? Yeah. I'll have to look and see if there's more.
Okay, so let me just switch over and go to another question. Would it work to have multiple? Would it work to have multiple iPads to differentiate communication for iPad? I'd hate to give up all the other benefits the iPad. Oh no, I completely agree, Dawn. You can have two, or you could have like the iPad Mini for the Proloquo or whatever app you're using, and then you could have a regular iPad for all the fun and games. I certainly don't want to give up the iPad for the fun and games. And you can go back and watch the earlier recording on iPad apps that I gave, because again, we want our students to interact with us, and if they're playing games, they're not likely to be interacting with us. All right, thank you for the research. We think Ogcom will replace my son's voice, but the school fought us saying, yeah, no, there's ample research out there. And then one more, what are rights for our kids who are autism and nonverbal in care homes? They don't have as many rights as they do when they're under 21, but when every state has to follow federal policy, and so that means that you have to have a plan. So your team would come together to make a plan, and then you could just ask that your plan include a communication strategy. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I want us to get through everything. So here we have Nadia. She was 4. This is the little girl I told you about. She had autism and Down syndrome. She learned PECS very quickly when she was a toddler, but her vocabulary was growing and growing and growing. And because she had Down syndrome, she had very poor motor skills, so we couldn't teach her sign. And when we did teach her sign, everything sort of got blended together. So if she was learning cracker, she would confuse cracker with more, even though they're on 2 different body parts. So we're the private program, and so we started her on her iPad and Proloquo. And during the meeting, the speech and language pathologist said to me, you gave up working on her verbal skills. And I seriously thought I was going to jump across the table. But she was, like 22, and so I decided that I wouldn't be so harsh on her, and I just explained to her that we were still working on all of her vocal skills, because vocal skills precede verbal skills, and then we were not going to give up on her talking. But her behavior was going to continue to get worse if we didn't teach her how to ask for the toilet, ask for a break, ask to eat. Now, before you pick your device, you have to assess. And I'm not going to spend very much time on assessment. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. You have to test the learner, but you also have to test the family, and you have to test the environments. It all comes together in making sure that you get the right fit. The last thing we want is to get a device and have it be on a shelf. And that page there is just a list of all the things that we're going to test on the learner. And then that link at the bottom is a wonderful feature matching program. It's a chart actually where you go in and see here's what the child can do and here's what the device options are, and it helps you get to a device fairly quickly. And then obviously you want to look at the history, what's been tried, what's worked before, any barriers that might, if you've got a student that really likes to throw their iPad, you might want to look at some other non-destructible form of communication. So the process looks like this. They'll come in, they'll interview, they'll do the file review. They'll look at what the user can do. They'll even try out different devices on the student. They're also going to look at where does the child need to communicate, and they'll go into each environment and look at how they need to communicate. And then they have to go back and ask the family, what is going to work for your child, your life, and how's that going to work across home and school environments. Now, before I go into teaching, how we teach the device, I'm going to answer a couple of additional questions. Have you also used similar devices such as iPad Touch? So Joe, I like the iPad Touch, but you have to have, the user has to be super skilled with their visual acuity and their motor dexterity, meaning they have to be able to touch teeny tiny pictures. And so I don't use the iPod because of its size. It's wonderful because it's super portable, but even I don't like to use Proloquo on my phone. It's just too small. My states denied coverage of the iPad on the basis of lack of evidence. Again, Dina, email me and we'll pull up some of those studies. Do you know if we have the same rights as DODEA schools have the same? Jessica, you're going to have to text me because I have no idea what DODEA is. Department of Defense. So maybe you're in a different country with the Department of Defense. If you're in a different country with the Department of Defense, you have the exact same rights as students in the United States. The iPad apps presentation, Nisi will send that out to you guys or tell you where to get it, because I think it's on either the Johnson Center website or the ARI website. Is there a program or method to implement AT that our ABA staff can learn? Okay, here we go. That was a great question and great segue. How do you teach the child to use it? So they don't learn it by osmosis. You can't sit it there and expect them to learn it. And so you have to actually teach it. So your ABA team actually does the same ABA instruction that they use for all the other skills. We prompt, we reinforce, we fade the prompts, and we then reinforcement. And I actually just, I've been consulting with a young fella over in London, and I wrote up a manding protocol for him and for using the Proloquo. So if you will shoot me an email, I will email you that protocol as well. But it's very simple. We set up what's called a manding program, and we start with one thing, and we identify something they really, 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 really like. So for one little girl that I worked with, it was pudding. And so we took a picture of the pudding, we brought it into Proloquo, and we programmed it to say, I want pudding. And so we gave her a couple of bites of the pudding, make sure she was still in the mood for pudding. And then we showed her the device, and we gently made her hand touch it. And immediately it said, I want pudding. And we're like, oh, you want pudding? Here you go. And we gave her pudding. And so then on the second time, we opened up the device, and her mom's holding the pudding, you know, nice and tasty right there in front of her face. And I gently pushed her elbow this time right up to the device, and her finger was out there, and it activated it. And we're like, whoa, you want pudding? Here's pudding. On the third try, that little sucker activated the switch. Her mother started crying because it worked. She independently pushed, I want pudding, and she got pudding. Okay, so yeah, it was one picture. Then the next step is to bring up another picture. And you can do it two ways. You can do preferred, non-preferred. So you could do pudding and I want to do math work, for example, something very boring. And if they touch math work and you do math work, they're going to quickly realize, no, I have to pay attention to the pictures. And once you can prove that they can discriminate between two pictures, then you can gradually increase your field. Now, one of the things that Proloquo will let you do under your settings button, and I'm going to take you quickly over to their website because they have all of their free webinars on how to do Proloquo. Okay? So you just go to their website, proloquo2go.com, and then click over to their training, and it actually turns into a new website called Assistiveware, and you can download all of these. You can put them right into your iPad and watch them when you're bored at the doctor's office, or listen to them while you're driving. Please don't try to do Proloquo and drive at the same time. But everything you need for Proloquo is right there. But you can go in and change the settings so that you have one row, one column, and one picture on the screen. And then you can do one row and two columns, you have two pictures on the screen. And you just go on and make it more complex as your student progresses. You can take away the message window. Like my brother does not know how to read, and so we take away the message window because he doesn't need to see the written word. He just needs to hear what it's saying. So that gives you a little bit more space on the screen. You can also if your student can type, then you can actually turn it onto the typewriter and they can type their own message. So lots and lots of options with our Proloquo. Now, we also have to teach all the people around our loved ones because they also are scared of all this new technology. I mean, part of the reason why teachers say they don't want to buy the iPad is because they themselves don't know how to use it. And it's just one more new thing to use. I went into a private school, I don't know, maybe 8 months ago, and they had every child using some app for communication on the iPad, and I was so impressed because, again, the iPad's only 2 years old, 3 years old, and here they were way ahead of the curve, which is fantastic. But it's not just the teachers that need to learn. It's the bus drivers, it's the cafeteria workers, it's the office staff. Okay, now I'm going to do just a couple more questions before I go back to more more slides. Okay, our son is 9. He's nonverbal. He currently uses Dynavox. We're planning on buying an iPad this month. Do you have a preference, full-size iPad mini? Angel, it depends on how good his motor skills are. If he has bad motor skills, you might want to go with the full iPad. I know the iPad mini is cheaper. It's easier to transport. But given that my brother has the iPad plus the speakers that go with it in the case. It's a case with the speakers, and it works really well because you can amplify it super loud or medium loud. I have a 13-year-old. Her expressive language skills have been lacking. At her evaluation, she said just throw her into life. How would you recommend that I do that? I think I might be a little confused by the question, Stacy. I mean, we just start. If we're going to use augmentative communication, we get the program going, whether it's sign, whether it's PECS, whether it's you know, an iPad. We put the system together and we start right away using it all the time. Even just this weekend, I was teaching my brother to discriminate whether he wanted to go outside and play outside or whether he wanted to stay inside and play with his cars and trucks. And so he was discriminating between those two little pictures. My son's 13 and the district denied him AAC because they claim he's not using PECS. I don't understand that logic, nor do I. So your next step, Becky, is to simply ask for an AT evaluation. End of story. They can say, well, we already did one, and you say, well, when? Because I don't remember consenting to it. And if they said, oh, 6 months ago, for every evaluation they do, you can have an independent one within 1 year. Okay, so if it's been more than a year, then they get a chance to do it again. If they've never done one, then shame on them for starting with PECS without doing an assessment first. I like PECS. I'm not saying PECS is bad. It's an assessment. You have to decide what's going to work for the child. Send me the protocol for ProLoco. Okay. No, you can't email me on here because once I'm gone, I don't have it. You'll have to email me, info@appliedbehavioralstrategies.com. Okay, one more question, then I'm going to go on. Do you feel time should be used to train the child on systems like GoTalk before introducing them to the iPad? She's already familiar with the tablets and knows how to use them for games. Their speech therapist says she refuses to work with the iPad. I think it's all about contingencies. I can teach anybody to do anything, including eat broccoli or asparagus or use an iPad. So if we want her to learn to use the iPad to communicate, then we simply have to set up the contingencies that if she wants whatever it is she wants, she's got to ask for it. Okay, I'm going to go back and go through a couple more things. So if you're going to go down the sign language route, you want to make sure that you first identify the right vocabulary, and then you have to set up the temptations. So for instance, if you're wanting to teach the child to ask for popcorn, it's a pretty simple sign to do. And of course, if they like popcorn, you don't want to do it if they don't, then you need to be eating popcorn and sort of, wave it in front of their nose so they smell it, and then model how to sign popcorn, prompt them to say popcorn, and immediately give them the popcorn. Okay? So that's your teaching, that's your prompting, that's your reinforcement, and then you fade your prompting so that they learn to say popcorn independently. If you're going to do PECS, again, you want to make sure that you have the right functional vocabulary. For all of these, the vocabulary is key. So you want to make sure that you teach the basic exchange first, then you work on distance and persistence, then they have to learn between two signs or two pictures, and then they learn to put into a sentence, and then they learn to do it with their peers. And that's what the phases look like, 1 through 6. Now, I don't just use the iPad or the ProLoquo for communicating. You can also use it to teach writing and to teach reading. But we don't have time to necessarily go into all those options. Now, I know I keep talking about ProLoquo. You need to understand that there are many other options out there, some of which I haven't had time to test. I did just get an email yesterday about a new app that they want me to try out. And I'm always happy to try these apps out and give you guys feedback. It's just that Proloquo does so much so easily. And like I said, I can certainly teach you a few skills, but I think it's more important for you to go learn the software with the free trainings that they have, and then you tweak it for your own learner. So what you see here is a picture of what Proloquo looks like on a device, and you see all these little things that look like folders. They're little manila folders. All right, that's what we call a folder. Now, you can clean all this up so that there's only one folder on the screen or two folders on the screen. My brother's is set up, he has a home folder, he has a second folder which is his work folder, and then he has a third folder which is community. So like when we go to restaurants, you know, ride the train to New York City, etc. Right? So he has his three little folders, and then inside each folder he has different things based on what he needs at that setting, so that it's highly, highly customized to him. I'm going to fast forward to this slide. When you're picking vocabulary, you want to always start with a simple, simple, simple word like eat, for example. And then once the child learns that that means eat, then you can start having them discriminate, well, do I want to eat fruit or do I want to have a snack food? And then once they learn how to discriminate between fruit, then you say, oh, which fruit do you want? Do you want the apple or the banana? So that they start to learn all of these different levels of communication. I'm going to read a couple more questions, and then we were going to have to stop because I motored through and I can't believe an hour has passed. If your child can already ask a one-word item, can we use the iPad to increase his utterances into phrases? You can, but it all comes down to response efficiency, response effort. So if your child can say want, well, let's say milk. Your child says milk, milk, milk. To get them to say want milk or more milk, that takes a lot more effort. And if you put it on the iPad or PAX or whatever, now it's two physical movements. So they have to hit want and they have to hit milk, or they have to hit more and they have to hit milk. And so that's more motor skills. And so you don't want to move too quickly because you don't want communication to be punitive. All right, you don't want the communication to be so hard that they don't want to communicate anymore. Okay, and I'm going to do one more, and then we must stop. My daughter's just starting to work with pictures and saying some words to ask for her wants and needs. Would the iPad be an easy transition for her? She has had an AT eval and suggested we continue working with pictures until fall. Well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want to wait. I'm ready to start now. I think that you shouldn't have to wait. If she can discriminate pictures already, I think when you link it to some voices that are going to come out, and I just want to play a couple off of mine so that you can hear the difference. And you can make a boy voice, you can make a girl voice, you can make it talk faster, talk slower. Listen to this.
I like this webinar.
So I programmed it to say, I like this webinar, and there's a cute little person sitting at a computer working. So, you just have unlimited options of what you want your device to do. So with that, I know that the time flew and we didn't get to do a whole lot together, but you'll be able to download the slides. You can read through the slides. If you still have additional questions, please send them to me at info@appliedbehavioralstrategies.com. I can't give you intervention, for your specific child, but I can give you general suggestions, about those things. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Nisi. She's going to get us all wrapped up. But I thank you all so much for attending and participating, and for all your great questions. The email is on the screen, so info@appliedbehavioralstrategies.com. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.